Thought we had this killer marketing guy. He couldn't organically grow the Nashville.
I couldn't get the phones to ring.
I was probably 26 at the time. Had been here for like 2.5 years.
We were the idiots that sent a 26-year-old out
Yeah,
there.
for real. Had an owner. He had like 10 different properties, and we just forgot to set up the recurring payment.
You acquire a company, and then you find out in the following months that it wasn't everything that they said it was going to be.
He would literally take a check and deposit it on behalf of some of his owners. And we're like, man, the computer can just send that money.
Any other pain points or pitfalls you want to point out before we sign off? This has been really depressing podcast. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Evernest Property Management Show. I am your host, Spencer Sutton, and today I've got a co-host with me. I got two co-hosts, and I know the second co-host is probably better than my first co-host, but my first co-host is Matthew Whitaker. Matthew, welcome back to the show.
What a great introduction. Thank you.
I paid him to say that.
We've got Gray Hall with us. Gray is I don't even know Gray's title.
I don't either, but I do know right before we got on, he just planted a seed so I would be crappy. He gave me some like really bad news, and then he said,
"Yeah, why did you?
All
give
right,
it
let's
to
hit
him?
record and let's go
Let's see
for
what
it."
happens.
Yeah,
Let's see what happens with Matthew.
He's trying to take my
So
spot.
Matthew's head is like swirling.
It's
right
intentional.
now.
Yeah,
you get a position if you want to get back in the podcast. We got this new studio.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
If you think you're ever going to get out of just getting bad news, just no matter how big you get, I don't think it ever stops happening.
And then you get the worst of it. And
Yeah.
then you hear,
Probably the bad news is small. Maybe when you're just starting out, it's smaller, right? So the bad news is
Well, it's
an
all
owner's
relative.
leaving, one owner's leaving, or
yeah,
whatever.
and that mattered.
Yeah, definitely
really
mattered.
early, right? Like it's all relative. I think the difference today is that I get all the hairy bad news that there's no real easy solves, because if there were easy solves, they would have already been solved.
Right. Yeah.
And
You wouldn't have
so-
heard about it.
Yeah, yeah. So you get the ones where there aren't really easy answers.
So on that note, that's our introduction.
Perfect segue.
Perfect segue.
It is a great introduction to our subject
It
today.
is, yeah. So the what we want to talk about today is we want to talk about the pitfalls, the challenges, the difficulty of, like, everybody loves to talk about acquisitions, and everybody, sellers want to maximize their value, buyers want to get a great deal, and we talk about this a lot. But what we don't really talk about are the challenges and the pitfalls of integrating businesses together. And so that's what we want to talk about today.
Yeah. Buying is easy. Integrating is hard.
But it feels like there's a lot of hard work, and then you feel like you should celebrate once you buy, but that's when all of the problems start and all of the hard work happens.
Is it kind of like the Nick Saban rule? Can you like celebrate for one night and then the next day you go back on the
You can
recruiting
do the
trail?
24-hour rule. I remember when we bought our first business up in Nashville. I remember being at a gas station. I don't remember. Were you there with me, or maybe
I started
it was
right after.
Oh, that's right. You didn't get that. Sorry about that. Lavelle was there, I think, and we were packing up to head home. It was right before a weekend. We had just closed, and I remember being at the gas station, and somebody asked me, "Are you excited about the acquisition?" And I said, "No, I just feel like we've just bought a bunch of work," right? Because the attorneys, the sellers, in some cases, they get to just ride off into the sunset. But those of us that are buying, our work's just begun. And we feel like to get to close, it was a lot of work. And then now you have the integration.
So that's what we want to talk about today. And so to kick this thing off, Matthew, let's give a real brief history about our acquisition history. Started back, I know you acquired, even before I got here, acquired a couple here in Birmingham.
So
small ones.
we bought some small Birmingham businesses when we were just a Birmingham-based company. That's where we learned that we could do something like this. Rolled them onto our platform. Tried to open a Nashville market. Thought we had this killer marketing guy. He couldn't organically grow the Nashville.
I couldn't get the phones to ring.
And we decided the best thing to do would be to buy a business. So we bought a business up there. Over the course of our career, over the course of my career, I've probably bought 30 different businesses, and everything from really large ones to the one we did recently, all the way to really small ones. We bought businesses with 30 doors.
Right. And most of those were probably like tuck in situations.
Yeah, I would say other than two fairly large, and when I say fairly large, I would say north of 2,000 doors. I would say the majority of them, the other 28, are your 300, call it 200 to 400 unit.
Gotcha. So that's the history. Gray has been involved in a vast majority of them, almost all of them. And a big part of them, Gray, you actually were boots on the ground in one of the biggest ones that we had done up to that point, which was Denver, Colorado.
Yeah.
Take us through real quickly some of the challenges with that integration.
I don't know if we have enough time to start. We had probably done 5 or 6 to that point. I wanted to move to Colorado.
And we had learned a lot, right? We had learned a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. You always kind of iterate and like learn. And so we've got this checklist. We have this process. You go through due diligence. This is the furthest away. I mean, this was like out in Colorado. We had bought in Little Rock and Nashville.
We
and
were used to
Chattanooga.
Driving to these places.
Yeah.
Right?
So we bought this business. It had 600 units. And so that's the other thing is you want to buy a business with enough density where you can actually support a staff. You don't want to buy 25 or 30 units in a new market. That just doesn't, it's not a good way to grow. So this was a big enough business and you go out there. I was probably 26 at the time, had been here for like 2.5 years.
We were the idiots that sent a 26-year-old out
Yeah,
there.
for real. It was hard. We learned a lot of lessons. I think the first one that kind of sticks out is there are market nuances that you need to be aware of. And so we took Alabama logic and kind of a less landlord and tenant friendly state out to Colorado. It's just different. We bought a business. So we bought 2 businesses in 5 months there. So the first 4 months, relatively smooth. This was a period where we kind of slow changed the brand. Today, basically day one, we switch over the brand, we switch over the systems, we switch over the processes because we found that just produces a better product. At that time, we still kind of slow rolled it. So there was a 90-day integration process with 2 different management systems and a slow roll off of the brand. That does not really work well. It just, you end up trying to integrate a business, you try to integrate people, and there's duplicative work everywhere, 2 different websites, et cetera. So there was a lot of work in the first, but we stabilized that one. It was probably 400 units. Had to make some people decisions. Some people didn't want to stay. We had to let go of some people that just didn't have a seat on the bus. We bought another business right before summer. So we bought another business May. And then going into summer, that was another lesson learned. In Birmingham and Nashville, people will move throughout the year. There's more in the summer, but in Colorado, you do not want to move in the winter. So we bought these 2 businesses. And I remember the middle of summer, we had like 200 units turning every single month. We had 50 owners, I think, fire us in the first 30 days because we weren't local in Boulder, and the broker quit in the middle of all of this. And so just like a ton of lessons about getting the right people in place and then not trying to do too much at once. I think we tried to cram a lot in because we saw a lot of opportunity. So hopefully we've like learned a lot of mistakes from that, but that was a really stressful year for me. I just got married, just moved out there. We churned a bunch of doors, lost a bunch of money. And then I think for the company, it was a pretty rough year.
It was hard for Gray to do all the things he had to do and ski at the same time. So, it was a difficult year for him.
I remember he was stressed. I mean, and you mentioned we had a list, right? We were adding to it. Like, what are some of the things that you added to the list based on that experience that you had in Denver?
If the previous owner was paying owners' mortgages, you should probably continue to pay those. Had an owner, he had like 10 different properties, and we just forgot to set up the recurring payment. It wasn't something that we typically did. And so there's all these different things in these nuances of the business. It cost him because it hit his credit report. And so we had to give this massive credit because Mr. Cooper's, I think that's the big like mortgage servicer.
Yeah.
That one sticks in my brain because
I had a problem with them too.
Yeah,
they're horrible to
we
deal
screwed
with.
it up. The owner, after about a year, kind of fired us. But like, there's little things like that you've got to get right. And so that was one of the things I remember that added to the list.
I'll tell you the big learning we had from that, because we started it when we went to Atlanta, was the acquisition team. That was the last acquisition we did without an integration, like a team that we built that was set apart. And that was the one where we tried to do it with just the team that we had there. Atlanta, which was October later that year. So we bought those two businesses, the second one in May. We bought a business in Atlanta in October, and we had a integration acquisition team, and that's where we felt like we really nailed it. So you were the last one that we didn't.
Yeah, I screwed it up so bad that we had to throw some extra people at it. Is what you should read.
It makes sense though.
But it does. I mean, I remember it was just me out there, and then I had like Curran. I had him on speed dial, and we talked every single day because he was just pushing stuff through, kind of on the accounting finance side. But the lesson learned was like one person at a business that size, you can't call the owners. You can't assess the team members. You can't make sure everything gets plugged in, make sure everything is kind of in the right place. And then like reaching out, make sure that you're doing a good job for the owners is just a really tough thing. So I remember for that Atlanta one, we called every single owner in the first 2 weeks. We had like Jacob West was up there and Duncan was up there. And I think
that was a bigger portfolio, wasn't it?
It was a couple hundred, but I still think like today that
Atlanta
was one of our best acquisitions from like a retention standpoint because we had that dedicated team on there. So now today we have a full acquisition team whenever we do these. And that's like their full-time job is like working in the business, getting the team members trained up, making sure that you're doing audits every single day to just make sure things aren't falling through the cracks.
What kind of challenges did we have with softwares, right? Because not everybody's running on the same softwares. Is that a challenge that a lot of acquirers would run into?
My experience was when we first started, today what we do is we just integrate the software day one. Like we've done all the heavy lifting, done reconciled trust accounts, done everything we need to do to switch day one. But in the past, we didn't want the owners we thought of it more like a bank. Like let's slow roll this thing so that the owners don't even know. And then one day we'll just switch the logos on them. And what we found is when you take the former company's processes and then you try to marry them with our process, they just don't match. And we don't really know their processes, so we don't know where things can leak out. And we made the decision from a software standpoint, it was way better for us to run our software day one than it was, do the little bit of extra work. Maybe it's 20% of extra work to run our software day one so that we don't drop as many balls. We just found that it was way better for us to execute at a really high level versus trying to run the same software that the other group had.
And neither process is like right or wrong. They're just different. And so like the property accounting, generally we've absorbed property accounting, but otherwise you get to a place where I thought you were going to do this and I thought you were going to do this. And they might have different payables, approval process, or somebody handles maintenance different. And so it's better just import them into, we use AppFolio. So we work with AppFolio. They're literally in our software. And then we can just start using the acquisitions team day one. Would not recommend. There was one point where we ran PropertyWare and AppFolio for like an extended period of time.
Yeah.
And just think about like documenting all your processes. We had one for PropertyWare, one for AppFolio, and just all the duplicative work that goes down there. And ultimately, anytime you add complexity to a process, it's just harder to execute for the owners. And the name of this game is just like keeping it simple, executing for owners. And so that's like the reason why we do the extra work, the extra 20% on the front end.
How much due diligence goes into before you're acquiring? Because I'm just imagining this would be one of the pitfalls is that you acquire a company and then you find out in the following months that it wasn't everything that they said it was going to be. But so how do you mitigate that risk, I guess? And maybe you can tell a story. Is there a story where we've been like, holy crap, we didn't realize this was a problem?
There's a long list of them. If you are not buying the entire company and you're just assigning the management agreements, you should have a provision in there that really anything up until the point that you bought it is the responsibility of the seller. At least that's how we generally structure our contracts. Now, it doesn't mean that issues like won't pop up because like this will. The reality is a lot of times the sellers, they don't give you full access to the business. They don't give you full access to the team members. So you really got to kind of trust what they say. Now you can audit some information. Sellers will give us a login to their account, but there's just a lot of stuff in emails that you're not going to see. So one, structure the contract so that you're protected from that side. And two, making sure you have a good relationship with the owner and a process for, hey, when issues come up that started before you really took over ownership of them, that you've got a way to kind of work through that with the owner. What the challenge becomes, the owner of the property can be kind of left out to dry. if you aren't wanting to pay for something or there's kind of an issue there. So you got to solve for the owner first and then work on the back end to make it right with the seller.
Yeah. Any thoughts come up for you, Matthew?
I don't think so. I agree.
What about, speaking of owners, let's talk about owner challenges. What are the biggest challenges with taking over, acquiring a company where maybe this person, this guy or girl has built these great relationships. They built, they're managing 300, 400, 500 doors. And then all of a sudden they hadn't told their owners and then they're gone and you're taking over. What are the big challenges, pitfalls there?
I think, and this is similar to what Greg just said, but it's around owner expectations that when you have a 300 unit business, it just runs way differently than a bigger business in our world. Now, if you're a 200 unit business and you're acquiring another 100 or 200, the business is not going to materially change. Y'all probably run your businesses very similarly. But as we've grown the business, when we fold in some of those bigger or some of those smaller portfolios into what we're doing, it's just a different business. So you have owners that have expectations. I remember talking about the Nashville, our first Nashville acquisition. The guy was literally driving around putting money in people's accounts versus just ACH sending he would literally take a check and deposit it on behalf of some of his owners. And we're like, man, the computer can just send that money. But that was what he was doing. He was doing that at like 6 different banks. And so you just have like a different expectation from the owners. And so that's part of the challenge is getting the owners to understand, hey, we're still going to do a great job. In fact, there's some areas that are probably going to be better. It's just going to change a little bit in how, in your expectations of what we look like.
I think something that helped us in the Nashville acquisition was I remember we had a meet and greet for all the owners because most of the owners were in state. They lived in Nashville. They had properties in Franklin or Brentwood or whatever, and so we had a meet and greet, and so we just got to meet everybody. I think Tom, the seller, was there, and I think that probably maybe helped us retain some of those people. And plus the fact that they could come to the office anytime they wanted to. I mean, knew who to talk to.
There's no doubt. I mean, it's a trust business. And when you build trust, doing things like a meet and greet, picking up the phone and calling all the owners, these are ways to build trust really early. But then it's all about execution and communication after that, right? You can only do so much on the front end. You can get started on the right foot building trust. But after that, you've got to do the 2 things that property management requires. It's execute. It's making sure that you get the signs in the yards, the lot boxes on the doors, the toilet fixed, and then making sure that the owner knows what's going on.
And you know what it comes down to? Really good people who care a lot. Because I was thinking about it, the thought process is when you're analyzing these businesses, if they are going to drop money in the owner's account or give them checks or that is a hard expectation for you to continue doing. But the way that you overcome that is you have somebody who can bridge the gap and help build trust with owners and then kind of get them onto a more sustainable process. But what you can't do is just flip the switch immediately and change everything for owners because you're going to lose trust. My experience, like very few owners fire you day one. It's probably going to come in months 4, 5, and 6 when you have the opportunity to screw something up or the opportunity to do something different. But these smaller acquisitions where you've got these really possibly unreasonable expectations or just high touch expectations, we've had somebody like a Curran in Little Rock who picked up every single phone call. And it takes that level of effort and that level of care to really go the extra mile and kind of retain owners. But you just have to have good people. And so in our world, that's like have a good market leader or an operator. But if you're 300 unit company, like you've got to fill that gap and have other people around to kind of like operate with that same mentality. Because it's just tough to like earn trust from owners. And oftentimes like they won't care until there's an issue. But at that point, you've got just a window to either win them over or they're going to terminate.
Have you found that it could be, this is what I found selling as I was a BDM and selling in Birmingham. I found it was way different even than selling in Nashville. And then it was different than selling in Denver. Have you found owners to be different around the country like that? Like maybe level of expectation. Some of them are, it's not that big of a deal. That's just something I noticed in the sales side. or selling
There's
management
probably
services.
some market nuance, like a market like Denver. There was a lot of people who lived in Denver. A market like St. Louis, a lot of them are not going to live there. Birmingham is a little bit like that. You've got these investor-friendly markets that over the past 10 years, there's been more technology. You can buy remotely. So it's more of like that type versus like owner kind of sentiment. But if they, like a market like Nashville is probably like this, where a lot of them used to live in the home or they're in the market, like that's a different level of communication than to an out-of-state investor.
Yeah.
So you got to be like aware of that. Outside of that, there's not a ton of kind of differences. But I mean, if you've got $700,000 asset, like that's different than $120,000 asset. And so I think just kind of understanding what you're buying, and you can be able to better communicate with them.
Sticking with people, let's talk about integrating team members. What are some of the challenges there if somebody is integrating a team, whether they're buying in their own market or they're buying out of state like we started doing?
I think the first challenge is when you're buying a smaller business and when you're a bigger business, and even if you are putting two small businesses together, as the business grows, you go from being a generalist to more specialist. That's what you need, right? When you first started your business, everybody was doing everything. Everybody was responsible for everything. You were all kind of in one room or in a few rooms. And so you knew that things were getting done. But as you scale the organization, you start to grow it, you get 400 or 500 units, you start to have people that need to specialize. And one of the big challenges we have, especially today, is we go in and buy a business and there's a bunch of great people running it, but there's a lot of generalists. And we have very specialized people doing specialized things in the organization. And if the generalist is flexible enough, they can go be a specialist in our world. But we have to say, hey, we run the business this way, and these are the available jobs. And you may have been a great generalist, but we don't need a generalist. We need somebody that's going to do this specific thing over and over and over again. If you like that specific thing, then you're really going to like working here. But if you don't like that, if you like the idea of sometimes I'm leasing, sometimes I'm posting rent, sometimes I'm talking to residents on the phone, that's probably not going to happen at Evernest.
Any thoughts, Gray?
We've gotten better at it, and we get to a place where I think we set the right expectations with the team members that we're buying, and we tell them, hey, you may have a seat, you may not. Mm-hmm. What you don't want to do is buy the business and leave these open loops. Do I have a job? So we try as quickly as possible.
Because that's the first thing they have to be thinking about.
Oh, yeah.
That's
Owner sells, am I fired? And a lot of times that said we don't get access to the team, understandably, until the deal finally closes. So they've just got a lot of questions. And so you're kind of walking this line of, everybody might not have a seat, but your job is to give them certainty as soon as possible. To Matthew's point, hey, these are the available jobs. Even recently, we've just posted jobs and said, hey, these are the 7 job types that we need, and like go in and apply, and then we'll go through and we'll interview everybody and try to quickly kind of give them that certainty.
We did that with an acquisition.
We did,
you're saying.
yeah.
Gotcha.
This is a larger acquisition, so there's kind of more team members. If it's 5 or 6 different people, you can just kind of meet with them and try to explain the system. So you want to do that because we can work at a different pace, but to Matthew's point, change is just hard for anybody. And so they've got to be willing to do that. We've had some great team members that we have had through acquisition, and they, are hungry and they buy into the culture and they just want to do more. And so this gives them that opportunity to do that. We've also had a number of people just say, hey, I liked what I was doing. I'm going to go find another job. I'd rather know that sooner rather than later. So we try to get to that as quickly as possible.
To double click on something Grace said, because I think it's important. Some of those smaller businesses don't offer team members the chance to grow, right? Because the organization's not growing. If it's growing 5 or 10%, yeah, maybe they can kind of move up, but it does have a limit on where they can grow their career. And a place like Evernest, the thing people get excited about is, hey, I can grow my career there. I can go from being a leasing agent or being a PMT to being a PM to being a market leader to being a regional. We've had a lot of people that have gone on that career path and done that. So it does offer, for people that are selling their business, it does offer a great way, a great solution for your team members to grow their careers.
Yeah, I was thinking, can you briefly tell the story of Victoria? Because she was part of an acquisition, right?
She was.
What was she doing when we acquired her?
She was actually living remotely. I think her husband was going to school somewhere on the East Coast, and we bought the business, and she was like, I need to be there if I want to have a shot. And so she like moves back, does like 6 months kind of long distance with her husband. And she started as a property manager, and then she worked her way up and she was managing a market. This is maybe in the past 2.5 years. Then she was managing all of Colorado, and now she's the regional director of the West. And she's just phenomenal. She's just early in her career, but just like does all of the right things. And I think she saw that opportunity. And so she flew across the country and, over a couple of weeks and just said like, I want to be here because I see the opportunity. I want to be successful. She's done all the right things. She's fun. If we could have 15 of her, we'd have way less problems. And so there, tons of examples like that Blake Webb's another guy who was a market leader. I think we bought a company that had aspirations to grow and they just didn't. Owners eventually wanted to do something else, but he's come in, he was a market leader, and now he runs our technician business. And so I think for the right people, like this is a cool opportunity because even back in the day, we didn't have, it was either be a property manager or a market leader. But now we've got sales and marketing. We have somebody that does YouTube full time. We've got a people experience team. And so that is part of the benefit to sell to the team members if they've got some ambition to grow.
Yeah. I just love Victoria's story because she's like so smart, like at such a young age. I mean, she's incredible. All right. Let's talk about, because I've been in conversations where people have asked, I want to acquire, should I acquire in my own city or should I potentially acquire in a different city? What kind of advice would you give or pitfalls might you point out of going into a different city versus doing it in your backyard?
It's going to be way easier in your backyard. One, from just finding the deals. Like this is just a network game. We've gotten a few from like sending out letters, but often it's like years of letters and they've listened to the podcast and they've been involved in NARPM. It's like one, just finding a deal is going to be easier. Two, back to the good people. Like you either have to hire somebody who's young and dumb and say, hey, we're going to move you somewhere in 2 years, and they're willing to do that, or recruiting somebody in that new to just take on a little bit of risk. And so like it comes down to those two things. Like if you have somebody who like wants to grow in another market and you've got the lead flow and the business is big enough, then you should, experience that. But it is harder. I mean, it's, especially if it's not in driving distance, you've got to rebuild the entire kind of team for the boots on the ground standpoint. So I'd say like get your business in your backyard big enough to where it can kind of support some of these other businesses if you want to start reaching out geographically.
And I would say if I had 300 units in a market and I had the chance to buy another 300 units in that same market or another market, it's way more profitable. We call it accretive to do it in one market, right? Because you already have the infrastructure there. You don't need a market leader. You don't need to go set up and have an office and have everything in the new market. So to the extent possible, I would just focus on your market and just grow your market as deep as humanly possible. That's going to create a really profitable business. And then once you've kind of tapped that out, then it's time for you to start expanding into new markets.
And I would even say, because you talked about a network game here in your local market, which is great. But I mean, Matthew we still don't have NARPM here in Birmingham. So you were going to NARPM in Atlanta and NARPM in Nashville, building relationships because you knew at some point, even though you were probably managing 500 doors in Birmingham, you knew at some point it was going to have to go beyond.
Yeah, I mean, Birmingham was the market size that you just knew at some point if you're going to continue to grow the business, you're going to have to get outside. And I remember, you're right, the funny thing is the NARPM lunches were the same week. So one was on Tuesday and one was on Thursday. So I'd ride up there on Tuesday to Nashville, ride back, ride over to Atlanta on Thursday, and do that once a month, every month. And the thing that, forgot what I was about to say.
Well, I will say this: our first Nashville deal, which was out of Birmingham, the first deal out of Birmingham, came from those NARPM lunches in Nashville.
That's right.
Because it was
it came from a referral from them. The person did not go to the NARPM lunch,
right,
but it came. Right. Two people from the NARPM lunch picked up the phone and called me and said, "Hey, this person's selling their business."
Yeah, and they're not a part of NARPM. They're just had their management company.
That's right.
Yeah. What's the looking back at our last acquisition, which was a really large one, what's the most painful part of doing something that big?
I mean, we're still not through the pain yet.
Yeah. Every day you're turning up rocks, looking at squiggly things.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that we've found is it takes way longer and costs way more money to integrate it, right? And there's just so many different moving pieces in the property management business, and different personalities and different people. And we went from 400 team members to now we're in the 600 or 700 team members. It's just a meaningfully different business. So not only are we integrating that business into what we're doing, and now we're 6 months into it, and we're hopefully going to be done pretty shortly, but it's just there's just like a lot happening. We're trying to learn as a management team how to manage a much bigger business. So there's just, as you grow the organization, I think you never stop learning, and it becomes a different business every time it grows. And so we're still feeling a bunch of the pains of, I will tell you though, if I had it to do all over again, I was actually sharing this with Gray. I had some intuition about certain things, having done this a bunch. I even shared my intuition with everybody. And I think as you grow an organization, you just need to be able to trust your intuition. And if we had trusted our intuition on certain things, we probably would have ripped the Band-Aid on some things and be way further ahead.
There are just a bunch of decisions, and you got to kind of move fast. And we move slow on some things. I mean, it's kind of like what you're talking about. And so had we moved faster, the reality is that if you got a good gut, you're going to be right probably 80% of the time, and you just have to like accept the 20% that you're not. I think that I'm excited to do like another 300 unit acquisition, because I think hopefully it will feel like
we can crush it.
You know what? It's like having two kids, and then you go down to one kid, and how easy you're like, golly, I can't believe how easy just having one kid is.
Yeah. Or
I feel like that's
they go
300 unit acquisition today.
Or they start driving and they're able to drive themselves places.
Yeah.
You're like, wow, this is really easy having an older teenager.
But it's like doing anything hard, whether it's running further than you run or lifted more, or just doing something harder, then like that becomes easier. And with all of you have to audit, and just think about that. If you buy 5,000 units, you got to make sure the data's right on 5,000 properties. And you don't always have like that big of a team, and you don't like triple, 10x the size of your team. And so it's just like, I think the data component, just like it's a bigger business. So there's like 50 vehicles you got to look at. There's a couple hundred team members. Everything just gets infinitely harder. And I think that was just a learning of. So we did the Pickett acquisition and then we did the Poplar acquisition, and so those are completely different. And so the acquisition scrum that we talk about, the checklist, radically different today. Now, not everything's going to apply to a smaller business, but we completely reworked that. We've got a lessons learned that we went through, just because there are different challenges at this kind of like business integration scale. So we've learned a lot, made a ton of mistakes that hopefully we won't make again. So like glad we have kind of experienced that, but yeah, we're still trying to figure out how to operate on this bigger scale.
All right, guys. Did I miss anything? Any other pain points or pitfalls you want to point out before we sign off? This has been really depressing podcast.
It's a great way to grow your business.
But it is like romanticized, right? A lot of people thought, oh man, if I could just buy businesses,
there's all
it's
these.
not always what you think it might be.
No, and there's the kind of movement of like post MBA, and you go off and you search for a business, and it's kind of like entrepreneurship through acquisition, and like it is a great way that you can have upside. You do take a lot of risk, but if you never like operated a business before, like it is really, really hard. Like it's a lot of long hours. It's really hard conversations with people. You've got to make decisions that affect other people. You also have debt or other people's capital, and you're making mistakes, and you're seeing that getting eaten away. So it's definitely like not easy, and it takes a lot of diligence, especially for like 6 months. So the other thing to be aware of is like diligence sucks up a bunch of time, and then integration sucks up a bunch of time. But after about 6 months and you've got the team in place, like things kind of slow down, and then you start romanticizing it again. You start looking for other deals. I think it's just important to know like there's a lot of work, and you've got to be that's got to be your full-time job. And so I think the other thing is like not taking your eye off what are the other things and we even do that today. It's like if all of our attention shifts to an acquisition,
What happens in the
trade-offs.
business?
There's
Right.
trade-offs. And so you've got to be aware of that.
for sure.
Churn goes up. All
Yeah, and
kinds of
that's
things
happened a
that
little
they're-
bit with this thing. It's like as we were all focused on integration, some of the legacy businesses we're seeing the impact on our attention on the acquisition on the legacy part of the business.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just like there are trade-offs and you've got to like make sure you know what they are and then hopefully learn from our mistakes and make sure that you've got plans in place. Like you always think that you do. There's just tons of unknowns that pop up with these things. But trying to do everything yourself will be like really tough, especially as these businesses get bigger.
All right, everybody. Thanks for being here. We will be back next week with another episode of the Evernest Property Management Show.